Let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Dr. Robert Leonard. I am the director and founder of the Hair Health Institute. We are located in New England. You may be able to tell by my Boston accents as I go talk along. I've been taking care of hair loss patients now for 37 years. I started a practice in 1989 and had a very, very busy hair restoration surgical practice, taking care of men and women alike. And I also founded the Hair Health Institute about 20 years ago, where we do non-surgical hair therapies, and I have a line of hair care products. And I thought I'd start a series of webinars beginning with tonight, starting with the early warning signs of hair loss and what steps that people can take early on, because the name of the game with hair loss is that it's a progressive condition. 98% of hair loss is genetic or it's hereditary. So the idea of noticing the problem early on can save people thousands and thousands of dollars and lots of angst and torment, to be very frank with you, if you can stop the progression early on. So let's go to the next slide, please. So why is early detection important to change outcomes? One of the most important things to note early on is that hairs don't just fall out and never grow back. I mean, there are a lot of myths about hair loss, and that's one of them. Hair loss goes through a process called miniaturization. So hairs on you see this cartoon on the right-hand side here. On the left-hand side, you see these hairs that are deeply embedded into the skin. They have blood supply still. And the important thing to note is that there are many of these hairs and they're deeply embedded in the skin. And those are called terminal hairs. Those are the hairs we love, and those are the hairs we want to keep. And over time, for various reasons, and we'll talk about each of those reasons, they undergo a process called miniaturization. They get shorter, as in the middle one shows, shorter and finer and thinner. And finally, on the right, they're called vellus hairs. Those hairs are miniaturized. They're actually microscopic. But the important thing to note is that the blood supply, each and every of the 150,000 follicles on the human scalp, has a blood supply that's unique to it, and the blood supply remains intact. So one of the treatments of hair loss is to reestablish that blood supply to reverse the process of miniaturization. So we want to preserve and protect the health of the hair and keep it as long as we can. And small changes are what's necessary to make a big impact long term. Next slide. So what is normal hair loss and normal shedding versus abnormal? So there's a cycle for hair, and it lasts about 2 to 6 years. So there are 3 phases in the cycle. One is called the anagen phase, which is the growing phase. And that's when our hair does exactly that. It grows. And people's genetic background will determine how long a person can grow his or her hair. So it's typically between 2 and 6 years. So the longer a person can grow hair, the longer the anagen phase. And then it goes through a stage called catagen, which lasts just 2 weeks. And that's an intermediate stage. And finally, the last stage is the resting phase of the hair follicle called telogen. And that lasts for about 3 or 4 months. So what happens is the original hair will be pushed out of the follicle by the next hair to replace it. And that time frame is between 3 and 4 months. And that's important clinically. So when the new hair pushes out, that's the next hair that will grow for another 2 to 6 years. And it's important to recognize that these hairs, every single follicle has its own timetable. So hairs are always growing and shedding. So the hair next to one another is not necessarily on the same timetable. And therefore, it's important to know that that's why hair doesn't all fall out at one time. It goes through different phases. Next stage. So how do we determine if your hair loss is normal or not? And I have always felt that it's important to determine the efficacy of a therapy, right? So you want to see if it's working. So we have to have a baseline. And the baseline is that it's normal to lose about 50 to 100 hairs per day. And people say, Jesus, Doc, that's a lot of hair. But when you have 150,000 hairs in your head, it really isn't a lot on a daily basis, because don't forget, Without male or female pattern baldness, they'll replace themselves. But when the hair loss reaches between 50 and 100 hairs each day, then we can say that that's abnormal hair loss. It's probably genetic hair loss. And how do we determine this? So I've had patients come into the office, I swear to God, with albums full of hair. So their hair from Monday and they're taped on Monday and then Tuesday, whole calendars. And sometimes they're very thick. And that's a little too much for me to handle, but more importantly, too much for the patient to perseverate over it. It's too much. So what I do, I created a hair count, which is 1 day and only 1 day at the beginning of therapy. And how do you do that? So first, the night before, this is going to happen on the day you shampoo your hair. And the night before, you clean off your pillowcases, you clean the drain in the sink, you clean the drain in the shower, you clean your brush. So everything has no hair there. And so after you shampoo your hair, first of all, when you wake up, you check the pillow. How many hair shafts are on that pillow? And literally, this is a tally. You tally each one and put it aside. Then you shampoo. You see how many hairs are in the drain. So most people have drains that have big holes and the hairs just go down the drain. That would not be helpful for us. So I tell people to go to the dollar store someplace and get one of those little hair strainers and put it in the drain before the shower. And when you're done showering, take that out and literally count every hair. This is why we don't want to do it just one time. We don't do it every day. And then if you have dark hair, use a white towel. If you have light hair, white hair or blonde, use a dark towel. And when you towel dry your hair, and you do not have to be gentle with your hair, you're not going to cause hair to fall out by toweling vigorously. You count how many hairs are on the towel. And then finally, where you style your hair for the day. If you blow dry it, if you brush it, comb it, typically it's over a sink is the most common area. So if you have a white sink, you can easily see the hairs in that and tally them. And then very importantly, in the brush. So during that morning routine, that 1 hour of every day is where people lose the vast majority of the hair that's going to fall out during that day. It's not that you're making them come out. It's that's where you see it most often, because vigorously shampooing and brushing and such, that's where you see them. And if that number is between 50 and 100, or let's use 100. If it's less than 100 hairs per day, then you can feel pretty confident that everything's A-okay. You don't have probably male or female pattern baldness. But if it's more than 100 hairs per day, that is a pretty concrete sign that you should start thinking about treating your hair loss. And so what I have people do is do that once, and then we discuss the treatments for hair loss, and we follow a pattern over the next year. And a good sign is that. The other thing is to take photography. So the next slide, please. So the other thing is to take pictures. So beforehand, if a person comes in for a consultation, I'll take photographs of the scalp, moving the hair aside and determining what it looks like pre-treatment. And it's important to realize that there are signs that people have to notice that they're having thinning hair. So this is a woman. Women tend to have a pattern of hair loss that's more generalized hair loss. So if you look at the bottom picture, her hairline, unfortunately, my pointer's not very helpful, but if you go along the hairline itself here, along the hairline, you can see that it's intact. So with a typical female pattern hairline with female pattern hair loss, about a quarter to half an inch of hair is maintained, just like they had in high school. But look behind it. So in this right behind the hairline, the circular area, that's where most women really start to notice that the hair is thinning. And they become very disconcerted about that, of course, because it's noticeable to other people. Women often told me that, people aren't looking at my eyes, they're looking at my scalp because the light from the room or if outside or anywhere, that light reflects back on the scalp, and it's very embarrassing and very noticeable. And it's important for people to be aware that that's something that needs to be treated. If you look at the picture on the top, if you part your hair, a widened part is another telltale sign that female pattern baldness is going on. So I examined, actually, if you made a part anywhere in the top of her head, it would show up to be wide. It's not just in the central area where it's showing in this particular picture. But it's important to recognize that, because If that's happening, your hair loss is well underway. Next slide, please. And here's a guy, he's young, he's probably about 32. And you can see this recession going on, the pattern of hair loss. The hairline is receded. And he has thick hair in the middle and pretty thick hair on the top. He has a receded hairline. This is relatively early hair loss. The forehead is looking bigger because the hairline is receding away from where it used to be in the past. And this is one of the first signs of early hair loss, is a receded hairline in men. Other people in the crown, the bald spot is called the crown of the head. That's another place where people notice it, but often it's noticed with the sunburn sign, in that because the hair isn't thick anymore, it's not protecting the scalp against the sunburn. And that's exactly what happened with me many years ago, probably about 40 years ago. I'm a lover of the beach. I'm a lover of the sun. And contrary to what my dermatologist daughter says, I shouldn't be in the sun. I got a sunburn. So I get home. I said to my wife, I said, why is this? My head hurts. Well, she says, for God's sakes, Bob, all day long, you're telling patients the first sign of hair loss is a sunburn. And that's exactly what happened to me. And it was surprising because you don't see the back of your head at all. And it's important to note that if it's thin enough to be burned, it needs to be treated. So that's important to understand. And next slide. So talking about photographs, I take pictures now, and everything, because of that physiologic 3 to 4 month time frame with the hair growth cycle, anything we recommend to treat your hair loss, whether it's minoxidil or photobiomodulation, low-level laser therapy, or finasteride or Propecia, anything or we do a hair transplant procedure, everything takes 3 to 4 months to take effect. And people say, geez, doc, in 3 or 4 months, I'll be bald. Well, it never happens. You don't become bald in 3 or 4 months, but it does take time. It's like taking a loading dose of a pill. It takes time sometimes for it to build up and build up to become effective. And that's not a magic time for 3 or 4 months. That's a physiologic time, and you can't change it. You can't make it any shorter, regardless of what you're doing. So it's important to realize that these things take time. It took a lot of time to lose the hair, and it takes a lot of time to regrow. This is another cartoon. I call this the birthday cake, but this is a cross section of the scalp. And again, if you look on the left-hand side, you can see these deeply embedded hair follicles. They're deeply embedded and they're plentiful with their blood supply. And as we go from the left to the right, the hairs get shorter and finer and thinner. And way over on the right-hand side, these miniaturized hairs are here. A scary statistic about hair loss is that after 50% of hair has miniaturized is when a person begins to notice his or her hair thinning. So this is not an instant thing, oh, I'm losing my hair overnight. It takes a long time, and a lot of hair has fallen before it becomes noticeable to people. So it's really important, if when you start to notice your hair thinning, that's when you should seek the services of a hair loss expert so that you can get appropriate treatment. It's important. The other thing that we notice with miniaturization is that the texture of the hair is less. So women particularly know this more than men, I found, that they can feel the hair. They can feel it getting thinner. It doesn't look any thinner, but they can feel it becoming thinner. And that's something that you shouldn't ignore. If you feel it's thinner, it's not all in your head, so to speak. It really is thinner. So the bottom line is that miniaturization is the hallmark of female and male pattern hair loss. And it's the earliest sign that we recognize, and we need to be aware of it and just seek treatment at that point. Next slide. So this is another pattern of hair loss in women. You can see the hairline, these short hairs used to be long, and now these are miniaturized. And her hairline eventually will actually break through. The forehead will break through, and this hair, if it's not treated, will indeed miniaturize further, and it'll look like she has a receded hairline, but in the central portion of her forehead instead of on the corners, like men get it in the corners more often. And we see also, just as an aside, there are men who have a female pattern of hair loss. And when I see a guy whose hairline isn't intact, it's still intact, just like they were teenagers, but it's thinning out behind it, I asked them about their mothers, their aunts, and their grandmothers, and every single time, literally every single time, they said that they had some woman in the family who had hair loss, a female pattern, and they happened to get that. With the female pattern hair loss, another thing that's important to recognize is that not only does it get thin at the top, it gets thin along the sides and back as well. And I call this the ponytail sign. So if a woman or a guy who has long hair, frankly, but a woman makes a ponytail, and I ask them the diameter of that ponytail, the thickness of it, is it thinner than it used to be 2 or 5 years before? If it's thinner, that means that the hairs, not only in the top that are creating the ponytail, but the hairs on the side, and particularly the back here, are all creating that ponytail, and it's getting thinner because those hairs are miniaturizing as well. So that's an important sign for women. If their ponytail is, if they have to put the scrunchie around one or two extra times than they used to have to do, then that's female pattern hair loss till proven otherwise. And I also talked already about the sunburn sign. But women tell me, if they have hair loss, especially they won't go in a restaurant and sit under a light in a restaurant, for example, because that is terribly embarrassing. And I really do know that if men don't like losing the hair, everybody would prefer to have hair than not have hair. I'll tell you that. Every single person, if you ask them. And men don't like it when they lose their hair. There's no doubt about that either. But it's really devastating for women to lose their hair. And so I often I still do. I take a lot of time with women because very often they're kind of blown off by their doctors, whether it's a dermatologist, a family doctor, because it's not important in many physicians' minds. And to stick up for my fellow doctors, in these days where venture capitalists own doctors' practices and hospitals own practices, and doctors are employees, unlike in the past when they were own bosses. They have a lot of stresses to see a lot of patients, and it's unfortunate. It's terrible, but it's a reality that they've got other more quote unquote more important things to do. So sometimes they will be somewhat rude to patients who have hair loss because it takes a lot of time, especially to talk to women about hair loss. Next slide. So they're subtle. These signs often are subtle. It's a very gradual process. It takes months to years, not days to weeks, to lose hair. And it's important to note that it will always get worse unless it's treated. There's no doubt about that. Photographs, I've maintained photography before, 6 months later, and every 6 months thereafter. And one a funny thing really is that we'll recommend treatment, even transplantation. And sometimes patients come and say, "Geez, I didn't a year later or 18 months later, I don't think I got anything, doc. But my transplant didn't work. What you're treating me is not working." So I pull out the before pictures, and they hold up the mirror and they look at the before pictures, and they're often really shocked because we look at ourselves every single day. We can't tell changes in ourselves, with weeks between time frames. Everything's gradual. And the restoration of hair is so gradual that they forgot what they looked like before they got treatment. So that's not uncommon. That 50% of hair loss before it's noticed is a real thing. Next slide. So, what are the common causes and triggers and patterns of hair loss? By far, 98% of hair loss is hereditary. So these are the genes that you can't change when you're changing your clothes in the morning. These genes come from both sides of the family. The inheritance used to be called um, male. It was dominant genetics. In other words, blaming the mother's father. Sex-linked dominant. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Sex-linked dominant means that the hair loss comes from the mother side of the family with men. So men would come in and say, "Well, my mother's father had a full head of hair. Why am I going bald?" Well, because the thought process about the genetics of hair loss is wrong. The genetics for men is polygenic inheritance. So bits of genetic information from both sides of the family are contributing to your hair loss at your present generation. And the more numbers of people on either side of your genetic tree of hair loss, the larger the potential for you to have male pattern hair loss, and at an earlier age. The same thing is true for women. It's very common. It maintains on the maternal side, mother, aunt, and grandmother on the mother's side. But I have many patients whose father's mother had the thin hair and that granddaughter got it. So polygenic means bits and pieces from everybody, both sides of the family contribute to the hair loss. Another type of hair loss that I want to talk about is telogen effluvium. Telogen is that telogen phase of the hair cycle, the fallout phase of the resting phase. And the word effluvium just means hair loss. So this is hair loss during the telogen phase of the cycle. And it's a temporary hair loss. So the good news for most people, if they have this temporary hair loss, telogen effluvium, it's temporary. And that it will regrow after about 3 or 4 months. So common causes of this type of hair loss is pregnancy. So many women will have a baby, they'll lose a lot of hair, and then 3 to 6 months later, the hair will grow back to the same density, the same fullness it was before the baby was born. And so I had a lot of these patients come into the office, and the baby's crying and the mother's crying. And by the time the consult's over, I'm crying because it's upsetting to lose that much hair. And that happens a lot. It happens quickly. It's not a slow process. You can lose a lot of hair during that telogen effluvium phase. And so it's very disturbing to have that happen. Plus, the hormones of pregnancy can cause hair loss. It's all this stuff culminates in a very unhappy person. So I can tell them that it takes about 3 months for the hair to get its worst as far as its loss, and it takes another 3 to 6 months for it to regrow. And it regrows. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. However, if that woman or if that person has the predisposition to have genetic hair loss, when that hair regrows on her, it won't grow back as fulsome as it had been prior to the pregnancy. So in other words, it unmasked the fact that she also had genetic hair loss. You can have more than one disease, more than one type of hair loss at the same time. So that type of person who would otherwise not need treatment for the hair to grow back with just the telogen effluvium may want to consider treatment after nursing, of course, to catch the female pattern baldness at a very early stage. Another cause of this is dramatic weight loss. And with all our GLP-1s out there, we're seeing tremendous hair loss with the weight loss that's occurring with these medications. But prior to those meds, if a person went on like a crash diet, a low protein diet, it was very common for them to lose hair as they lost that weight so quickly. And if they stabilized with the weight loss, the hair would typically regrow, except in that circumstances I just described, where it would unmask genetic hair loss. And then the other thing that's dramatically, grossly overblown is stress causing hair loss. So when I write here, severe physiologic stress, that is not the everyday stress. And believe me, I know we are all in very stressful times these years, but that kind of everyday stress we all go through living life is not the kind of stress that causes hair loss. The kind of stress would be a terribly unfortunate and horrible thing if your family died in a plane crash, or really severe, real bad things happened in a family with a kidnapping, something really bad. That type of stress would be the stress that would cause this telogen effluvium. So every other person says, well, I'm really stressed, that's why I'm losing my hair. That really is not why they're losing hair. More than likely, they have genetic hair loss and they have anxiety. So every little hair looks like 10 or 20 that's falling out. And that's a whole other story that we can talk about at some other time. But those are the kind of causes of telogen effluvium. Know that it's typically self-reversible. It's temporary and reversible. There are medical causes of hair loss as well. One of them is thyroid. The thyroid is one of the master glands that's in the neck of the body. It regulates a lot of different things. So if your thyroid hormone levels fluctuate, if you become hypo, which is low thyroid, you can have thinning hair. If you become hyperthyroid, if it's overactive, you can have hair loss due to that. So you'll get treated by your doctor. You'll take a thyroid medication to make everything nice and level and even. And when everything's even with your thyroid, everything goes back to normal. So that can be temporary, but a lot of people run low in the normal range of thyroid hormone level, and those people typically will need treatment for the hair loss in the long term. low ferritin and low iron stores, the anemia that can cause hair loss. So when the anemia is corrected, whether they get red blood cells or they get iron supplementation, whatever, that can also help. But a lot of people run low on their red blood cells, so they often need therapy for their hair loss in that regard. The other word, alopecia areata, is a medical condition that causes hair loss. And a lot of people I want to just mention now, alopecia, that word simply means hair loss. So there are all different kinds of alopecia. And when people have this particular condition, alopecia areata, they often just mention alopecia. But the areata is the important part. Areata means little spots, or could be large spots of real baldness. So you have good hair, and then it's a real bald spot. There's very little hair, and there is no hair in that area. It can be little spot, it can be one spot, it can be many, it can be the entire head. If it's the scalp, it's called alopecia totalis. If it's the entire body, people have no body hair, it's alopecia universalis. That's an autoimmune condition where the body, for whatever reason, sees the hair follicles as foreign, as like a splinter in your finger, and all these white blood cells come, which is inflammation. Inflammation is a bad thing typically for all parts of our body, including the hair. Inflammation comes and the hairs fall out right away, and they really fall out, and you can literally get handfuls of hair. That's not genetic hair loss, and that's treated with steroids. It's treated with other things, and two-thirds of people, it's a very interesting condition. Two-thirds of people, if they treat it with everything in the book or they don't treat it at all, two-thirds of people, the hair will grow back on its own. And despite what's treated, one-third of people won't grow it back. So that's an unusual condition that you need to see a dermatologist or hair loss specialist that can give injections or whatever else is necessary for that condition. And there are other inflammatory scalp conditions. So this is inflammation causing scarring. So these are called scarring alopecias, alopecia baldness because of scar tissue. And there are two or three different, maybe three or four different conditions. One is called lichen planopilaris, LPP. There's frontal facial alopecia. So these are conditions that are not genetic. They're not run-of-the-mill hair loss, and they need medical therapy with whether it's steroids or other treatments. Once the follicle is scarred, it's gone. So unlike with genetic hair loss, with androgenetic alopecia, the follicle never dies. They're just miniaturized hairs. Even if they're microscopic, they're there. And you saw that the blood supply is still with them. These conditions we're talking about right now, they're gone. The follicles are gone. Hormonal shifts, so perimenopause and menopause. With perimenopause, slowly, the estrogen that the body produces becomes lower. And with menopause, it goes away for the most part. And estrogen is really, really good for a woman's body for multiple different reasons. Estrogen is good for skin, for fertility, for all sorts of things, including hair. So as estrogen decreases, hair loss increases, and it can be rather dramatic. And so I recommend that the woman goes back to her gynecologist or family doctors to get estrogen replacement therapy. My original field, way back in the early stages of my medical career, I was in a resident OBGYN, so I'm very familiar with estrogen replacement therapy. And I think I'm a big proponent of it, but that's not my field. So I refer them back to their doctors, and if they choose to get it replaced, that's great. Excuse me, it will help their hair. Excuse me. If they choose not to, that's the decision as well. But these people we usually treat as if they have female pattern hair loss because the low estrogen actually unmasks the genetics of that as well. Senescence. Senescence means getting old age. And there's a condition that's relatively newly determined called senescent hair loss. So as we get older in our seventh and eighth decade of life, generally hair tends to thin out just because of multiple factors of aging. And that also it's beneficial to treat that with medical therapies. And psychological conditions, the one common one, and not terribly common, but you hear this word trichotillomania. Tricho is the hair, tello is pulling, and mania is being crazy pulling your hair. So trichotillomania is a very significant psychological psychiatric condition that I've seen quite often in my practice. And the treatment isn't to treat them with medical surgical therapy. They really need to see a psychologist or psychiatrist to get that condition taken care of, because they start off with twirling, 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 and eventually it feels good for them to pull a little bit. And by the time things are done, they're really pulling their hair. So for those patients with trichotillomania, if patients tell me they're twirling the hair, it's a sign for me to think about referring them to a specialist. In my community, I know two or three specialists who really take care of this condition and can cure it, but that's not of my wheelhouse for treatment. And there are a lot of other causes of hair loss that are not genetic. But again, always remember that if you're in a room of 100 people, 98 of them will have genetic hair loss, so androgenetic alopecia. And finally, we'll talk about styling damages. So we know that heat and hair, high heat in hair is not good, because hair is nothing more than protein. And if you have high heat on protein, it denatures. So it gets messed up. It's not healthy any longer. So if you're blow drying your hair, you have to stay a little farther away if you have it on the high heat range. If you use a curling iron, you really have to pay attention not to leave it on too long, because it will damage the hair shaft and it can be permanent. Your hair becomes brittle at that point and it's not healthy. And also if you do straight ironing. So all of that has to be aware of. I remember my sister, she used to actually use a real iron and iron her long hair. So very bad thing to do. Very tight braiding. So people of color do this often. They braid the beautiful little braids on their children, tight braids and cornrows, and it looks really cute, but it's very damaging to hair, because that pulling on a long-term basis, they usually keep them in for 2, 3, 4 weeks or more. That long-term pull on the hairs actually destroys the follicle. It's called traction alopecia, hair loss due to pulling on it, and it's that long term. So I always recommend to mothers of children who they've considered a braid like that to leave them in for maximum of 2 weeks and then let it come back to normal without having that constant tension. Very, very, very tight ponytails. You see these people, they're giving themselves a facelift from the ponytail. Having that in for a long time can also cause traction alopecia. And you see often older, even Black women in their 20s and older, they'll have hair loss along their entire hairline. And you say, well, that's a kind of, that's not receded hairline. That's from traction all those years along the hairline, because the biggest pull is from the part furthest away from the root of the hair. And that's where we have, and that needs to be transplanted. That cannot come back with medical therapy or laser. So that's important to know. And I guide these people along the way. Again, prevention is the name of the game. Next slide, please. And we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Anything, you can write down your questions and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I have some people who had sent them in already that I'll answer, but I want to make sure I got all these medical causes, styling. Yeah. Oh, one of the other styling mistakes, there's something, let's go back one slide, please. I don't know how old you people are, but I'm in my late 60s. And I remember my grandmother and her sister and sister-in-law, doing their own hair coloring in the kitchen, or perming the hair in the kitchen with those little rods. And you come in the house, it would stink from peroxide. It was terrible. And in those days, those products were not chemically timed to stop on their own, the chemical reaction to stop. So they had an egg timer. I'll never forget. They had an egg timer on the kitchen table. And when it rang, they hurried up and they rinsed out all that solution they had on the hair to either make it curly or to color it. Because if it stayed on too long, it would cause a chemical burn and would actually cause the hair to become broken, breakage, or brittle. And so all that I know of, all commercial hair care products, Miss Claire, all these things that are available on the market, the chemical reaction automatically stops at about 20 minutes. So you can leave these hair colors on for a day. You can leave the perm. You're not going to do damage by leaving them on now compared to the old days when the technology wasn't as good as it is today. So one of the things is, I think I mentioned before, along the hairline, the first signs of miniaturized hair, these little ones, a lot of people attributed it to breakage, and that's not breakage, it's miniaturization. but it happened a lot in the past. That's why I think people say that hair breaks a lot, but it doesn't. Next slide. And so it's time not to ignore hair loss, right? What not to ignore? Things not to ignore: a persistent shedding, so more than 100 hairs per day, especially if it lasts over time. That widened part that I showed you photos of, texture changes. So you can feel if your hair itself, the hairs, if they were more full, become finer and thinner. Fragile is not so much a big problem, but finer and thinner is textural changes. And women, as I said, they can tell much earlier than they can see that the hair is thinning by touch. And scalp visibility. Also, it's a sign that's rather a mid to late sign that you have thinning hair. Next slide. So, what can you do to treat hair loss? The first thing is not to ignore it. Some people say, oh, it's going to come back. It's not really, it is. I'm imagining it. So, that hair count that I told you about, it's worth doing to really set you straight as to whether you have to worry about it or not worry about it. And when I say worry about it, there's nothing wrong with being bald. There's nothing wrong with having thinning hair, but I'm telling you that most people would rather have hair than not have hair. So that's when you engage your mind to do something about it. So you want to stop it now, because if you stop miniaturization, it doesn't get worse. And again, patients tell me, if I can stay where I am and not get any worse, that's enough for me. And that's what a huge percentage of patients are very happy with having what they have. Even if it's thinner than it used to be, as long as it's not going to get worse, they're happy. But I'll tell you, it will always get worse. So genetic hair loss doesn't stop on its own. But obviously, not everybody who has genetic hair loss goes to the nth degree of full baldness, right? So we don't know. We can't predict how bad it will become. I can only say that it will get worse. I don't know to what extent. So preserve and restore your hair. That's the name of the game. And early recognition, the earlier the better, because the earlier you are, the more hair you save. Next slide. So this is something that I want to talk about, because what can you do practically? Practical tips get you. First of all, you need to use hair care products that are effective, right? It's great to get a hair care product that smells good and it's inexpensive and all that. But patients asked me many, many years ago, probably 18 years ago, Doc, what shall I use? What shampoo shall I use? And there's shampoos from, VO5 at used to be 78 cents a bottle. Now it's a little more, I'm sure. And then, shampoos that are $80 a bottle as well. So there's the full spectrum. But you need shampoo products and hair care products that are healthful for the hair. One of my mantras is a healthy scalp provides a milieu for healthy hair follicles, which grow then healthy hair. So, and it's true, because you start at the root. If the soil's not good, the plant's not going to be any good, right? And it's the same analogy where there are a lot of things that cause scalp inflammation. Pollution in the air, products that we use can cause inflammation. Inflammation affects with arthritis in our joints, inflammation, IBS in the bowel. Inflammation is everywhere, and it's bad. As I said before, it's bad, and including on the scalp. So we want products, or you should consider products that have anti-inflammatory effects in the scalp. And the other thing I want to touch upon about shampooing, daily shampooing is very important. I've had patients over the years young guys come in with their mothers for the consultation. And young could be a guy in his 40s, by the way, not just young people either. And the mother pulls me aside before we go into the guys in the consultation room. The mother pulls me aside, Dr. Leonard, tell him that he's shampooing his hair. He doesn't shampoo his hair, and that's causing his hair loss. Well, it's true. If you don't shampoo every day, you have buildup of epidermis cells. So on our bodies, we have epidermis cells as the upper layer of the skin all over the body. But when we wear clothes, when we shower and shampoo, these cells slough off all the time, every day. With the scalp, the epidermis cells are there as well. But there are two things that trap them on the scalp. One is hair, which we're glad to have the hair, but they trap the epidermal cells. And number two is sebum. Sebum is that oily substance that created from sebaceous glands, creating sebum. and that's an oily substance that moisturizes the scalp to keep it healthy. However, if these cells don't get removed from the scalp, and the hair and the sebum are a problem for that to happen, if they don't get removed, inflammation can occur. You can get fungal infections. That could be subclinical where you don't need medicine, but creating a bad milieu for the hair follicles. So shampooing vigorously every single day gets rid of those epidermal cells so they don't build up and cause problems. And people, like I told you earlier on, the area that you notice most hair loss is in the shower. You see hair in your hands in the shower. And people say, well, if I shampoo, that's causing my hair loss. And that's absolutely not correct. It's not right. There are hairs. I'll use this if you can see this a little bit. I have a pen in my hand, and there are bonds that break due to male pattern baldness. So this hair shaft is loose in here. So when you vigorously shampoo, the hair shaft comes out, and they're thinking that the shampooing is causing the hair to fall, which is not the case. Shampooing less often is a big problem because that's when the inflammation sets in, and it's unhealthy for the scalp and therefore for the hair. So you want shampoos that have no sulfates, no parabens, and no phthalates. PHTH, phthalates. Those are chemicals that the hair care industry uses in almost all products because they're inexpensive and they lather nicely and they do various things. But they're bad for the hair, they're bad for the scalp. So you should look at products of that. So patients asked me years ago, doc, what shampoo shall I use? So enough people asked me that I actually went down to a manufacturing company and spoke to the scientists who deal with these things. And I told them I wanted an all natural based ingredient. Every single ingredient that we chose is natural based, every one of them. And so they have properties of anti-inflammation, moisturization, all sorts of things that they do. And I created the line. Originally it was called Hair DR, Hair Doctor. And now over the last probably 12 or 13 years, we have Copper Chemist. And the reason it's called Copper Chemist is that it's active ingredient. So it's not a medication, but it's an copper peptide. Copper tripeptide 1 is what it is. And this particular peptide has become very popular in Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. And it's used to treat everything because it does have very good anti-inflammatory effects. But I put it in my products many, many years ago. I was a trendsetter, I guess. And it really does fight inflammation. And it's shown to do a number of different things as far as the copper peptide is concerned. So I'm going to just mention it creates anti-inflammation, moisturization, hair shaft repair. Remember, the hair shaft is protein, and this is an amino acid, right? A stimulation of cellular components to foster a better opportunity for hair growth. It's not a treatment for hair loss. It's not FDA approved or FDA cleared, but it fosters the effects of growth, which is important to have healthier scalp. So that's a product that you might want to investigate at some point. The copper peptides, it's a big deal these days. Next slide, please. So what do you do is first steps on for the next thing. So you want to address misconceptions. We'll talk about myths in a minute, but you want gentle hair care. And again, you don't have to be frou-frou gentle with shampooing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about hair drying with hot air too close, the styling with curling irons and straight irons. Very tight, avoid tight hairstyles. The braiding is very important not to do tightly. And evidence-balanced therapy. So I'm not going to touch upon specific therapies on this seminar. We'll do more at a later one. We'll really get deep into the various specifics of the FDA-approved and cleared therapies. But minoxidil is one of them. You've heard of Rogaine over these years. Finasteride is the generic for the brand Propecia, which is a pill. And photobiomodulation is the medical term for low-level laser therapy. Photo meaning light energy, bio meaning the hair follicles, and modulation means a positive effect. So you're using this light energy to create a positive effect of the hair follicles. And then copper peptide formulations, as I discussed, is a building block clinical based. That's all important to do. And I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 37 years, and I've used minoxidil, Rogaine, since it first came out in the early 1990s, finasteride in the late 1990s, and low-level laser therapy also in the late 1990s. So these therapies have been around for a long time. They're very well vetted. Each of them has a different benefit. Not everything works on 100% of the time. Just as a quick overview, minoxidil, Rogaine works on the entire scalp. If you look at the can of Rogaine, it says it only works in the back, but it literally works all over the scalp about 50% of the time to stop thinning, stop miniaturization and shedding, and about 50% of the time to regrow the hair, the miniaturized ones back into terminal hairs. It has to be used long term because it only works while it's stimulating the follicle. If you stop Rogaine, say you use it for 4 years, and you say, I'm sick of putting this on my head twice a day, and you stop it, after about 8 months, the benefits will reverse. So that's important to know. But it's the oldest treatment for hair loss that's been FDA approved. Finasteride Propecia works very, very well back here in the crown, especially. There is some frontal benefit, but mostly back here. 83% of the time to stop regression, 66% to regrow hair, 1 pill a day long term. Minor side effects, 0.3% of people have side effects, but that likewise has to be used long term. Low-level laser therapy, photobiomodulation. It works all over the head. It's done at home. You buy a device that you wear 6 minutes a day, no side effects at all. You wear it for 6 minutes a day, and that works 90% of the time all over the head to stabilize progression and 60% to regrow hair. And that's something that I'm a pioneer, in fact, of using this therapy. It's something that works extraordinarily well, both men and women. Women who have generally thinning hair, that ponytail sign, thin hair everywhere. The device that I recommend today is the latest and greatest, called the MD Duo. It's a cap that goes way down on the back of the head. So that's something you might want to consider. Next slide, please. So here are some myths about hair loss that you can read. The ones that come to mind most often is shedding equals baldness, and that's certainly not always the case. A myth that hair loss only happens in older people. Well, we know that's not right. I have patients as early as their teens, especially young girls and young men too sometimes, but more young women in their teens. Men start to exhibit hair loss in the mid to late 20s. A myth is wearing a baseball cap causes hair loss. That is definitely not the case. However, remember that mother and son who came in for the consultation. The other thing she always asks me is that tell my son to get rid of that baseball cap because it's causing his hair loss. Well, I hate to contradict mothers. I definitely do, but that's not true. The cap doesn't cause the hair loss, but the cap is a very important clinical sign that hair loss is bothering him. Now, I'm from an older school generation than you probably are, but people didn't wear baseball caps into the Capitol Grill of nice restaurants or into, going into wedding receptions wearing a baseball cap. And so that baseball cap is a sign that hair loss is bothering that guy. And I bring it up. And I talk to him about it. And we discuss, there are times that, these people are becoming kind of agoraphobic. They won't go to weddings. They won't go to funerals because they have to take the cap off. So it's a big sign for me that that's someone who's really concerned and needs some therapy as well as medical, not only hair therapy, but therapy as well. Hair loss genetics comes only from this one side of the family, and the man's side, that's not true. And facts are not all shedding leads to permanent hair loss. Obviously, if there's hair loss, we can treat it. It doesn't become permanent. Androgenetic alopecia only in the 20s and 30s. We know that's it can begin that early. That's true, but not only it lasts many years thereafter, and it affects both men and women. Next slide. So I've been treating hair loss for many, many, many years, and I have seen all sorts of examples how hair loss affects self-esteem, self-confidence, self-image. People find that they can't go out on a date. They can't go for a job interview because they have thin hair. A lot of things that hair impacts in a person's life. Certainly not everybody. As I said, baldness is not a bad thing. If you like it, it's fine. It doesn't. I don't foster my opinions or treatments on people who aren't bothered by their hair loss, but it can affect people in extreme ways. So that's something that I feel very happy that I can help people in their struggle, however bad or not so bad it is. The crowning glory affect women, especially with thinning hair. It's very difficult for women. I'll leave it at that. And I will say that, as I said, touched upon before, you can go to your family doctor and he or she may be very busy and they get dismissed. Patients get dismissed. Oh, don't worry about it. Hair loss is part of aging. It's normal. Don't worry. There's nothing we can do about it. You're fine. Go try some Rogaine. It's inevitable you're going to get bald. You might as well embrace it. These are all quotes that patients have told me, the doctors have told them. And I think that borders on malpractice, to be honest with you, but I don't want to walk in someone else's shoes. But people can't be dismissive of others with hair loss. It's something that's important to them. And I've made a whole career of it, and I'm very proud of what I've done. And I intend to continue doing that. Next slide. So one thing, if this is not enough for you, I offer complimentary consultations, and patients can go to my website, hairhealth.org, and you can learn a lot more. You can fill in some of the holes that I left out during this presentation. And I offer free consultation that you're welcome to come in. We'll do it online through the website. You can go to hairhealth.org/consult. It's on the homepage, and I'd be happy to see you in a personal way, and I'd be happy to be specific about what I could do to help you. Next slide. Copper Chemist selection we have here. I talked about the Copper Chemist. You can go to the hairhealth.org and no promo code is needed, and you get a discount on the hair care line. I welcome you to join the family of Copper Chemist. Next. And this is a picture of the MD Duo in the bottom there. You can see the back side of it. The deeper side goes way down to the nape of the neck to cover all areas of potential hair loss for men and women alike. Next slide. So, questions. Anybody have questions? Michelle will help me to get your questions to me so that I can answer them. But if there are some questions that people have left instead of attending today. So my mother and grandmother have thin hair. Does that mean I'll have hair loss as well? Well, not necessarily, but probably so, right? That's a very strong genetic link on the maternal side. And this woman who wrote in said that this is her situation, and probably she will. So, look for the early signs and get them evaluated and treated if necessary. Menopause, we answered that question through the talk. Birth control pill. So the pill itself doesn't cause hair loss, but any change in hormone level, and the birth control pills are hormone pills, right? So when they start it, they can have that telogen effluvium happen. And then if they stop it, they can have the telogen effluvium happen. The problem, and it's fine, they won't get pregnant, whatever the situation is, but the thing is, often the hair loss will trigger a person to stop on her own. And now the hair loss occurred because they just started it and it got steady for a little bit and then they stopped it. Now it's going to fall off so that it can increase the number of months of hair of telogen effluvium because they're starting and stopping. So if you're going to do it, stay on it. Or if you're going to be off it, not back and forth, off and on. My husband's, we talked about the baseball cap with the husband and boyfriend. So any other questions that you folks have?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you guys can drop them in the chat for Dr. Leonard. And then while we're waiting on that, I did also want to mention special offer just for you guys for attending. We are going to provide a $300 off discount for anyone interested in purchasing the MD Duo. That code is March 300. You can purchase that on doctor's website, hairhealth.org, and that promotion is good through the end of the month.
Well, I want to thank you. If you don't have any questions, I'm surprised you don't have any questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you very much for taking some time in your day to listen to me. And I'd be happy to help you in any way possible. If in the future, you can reach out through the website, hairhealth.org. My telephone number is 401 922 2100. And my email is Dr. Bob Leonard, DrBobLeonard @gmail.com. So thanks very much and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Doc, you'll have to go ahead and end the webinar.